It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. It was fun to realize that this episode would be released during the week of Melissa Struttmann's open house, celebrating Osage Hills Retreat's 2-year anniversary. Melissa has put so much thought, work, and love into creating a wonderful place for crafters to gather. She has learned through her life with the excellent work she has accomplished to bring all her expertise together. You can easily see this in the events that she offers at Osage Hills Retreat. Please take a moment to look at her episode page on A Quilter's Life website to see her quilt that 4 generations worked on. Notice in the picture of that quilt, there's a little black sewing machine that she used on that project. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life.
Thank you for having me.
When I interviewed Jody Leonardo, she mentioned you to me. So how do you know Jody?
I met Jody last year. Rochelle Rice of Inappropriate Quilters had hosted a quilt retreat last fall. It was Camp Rochelle Winneso. And Jody drove in from Minnesota to attend the retreat. And the three of us just really connected. And, we have a group text going. We stay in pretty regular contact. And recently, Jody told us that she had just interviewed with you for the podcast, and she shared the link, and she recommended that we each reach out to you. And I began listening to you that day.
And I saw you join my Facebook group.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. That's so much fun to see people pop up there. Tell us where you were born and raised.
I was born in McHenry, Illinois, and I have one brother who is 11 and a half years older than I am. And our family moved to Ohio when I was about 2. My dad was transferred quite a bit with his work. And we also lived in Indiana and Kentucky as I grew up. I enjoyed my time in Ohio the best, but I would call Kentucky my home base.
How about a special childhood memory?
Granny Muncie, which is my dad's mom, lived in the same house in Hazard, Kentucky. She lived in the same house that she raised her children in until she passed away. And we would visit my grandparents a few times a year, and I absolutely loved spending the night at her house. The bedrooms were so chilly as the house was heated by a stove in the front room, but she would layer the beds in so many quilts you could barely move. And I remember my face being really chilly, but I was so warm and cozy underneath all those quilts. And I would love to have some of those quilts or pictures of those quilts now.
Isn't it amazing how those memories are such a warm hug?
I know the memories of just recalling that and just feeling like she was hugging me. I'm sure that she tucked me in and pushed the covers in around my body. And it's just such a happy, warm feeling just thinking about it 50 years later.
That is amazing. Other than quilting, was there other employment you had?
Yes, I have always hustled even as a kid. When I was 7, 8 years old, I would make pot holders and keychains and would go door to door selling them in our neighborhood. I always had a savings account and pocket money. When I was a teenager, I delivered newspapers. And then as a young adult, I sold just about every home-based product like Mary Kay, Tupperware, Pampered Chef. I had a desktop publishing business in the late 1980s. I created a little niche for myself of doing like apartment newsletters and community association newsletters. So I would get the information from the property manager and type it up, and I'd even print it. And that was a nice little business back then because no one had computers. I pioneered 2 community magazines in different states. I owned a consignment store. I love owning a business, from running it to marketing it to the bookkeeping aspect. During this time of owning home-based businesses and doing stuff like this, I birthed and raised 6 children. When my kids were older, I officially got back into the workforce, and it was primarily nonprofit management. I worked for American Diabetes Association. I managed a literacy program. 2 years ago, after a year of planning, my husband and I purchased a property that is part residential and part quilt retreat center. And I just recently resigned from my nonprofit job to focus on the retreat center and on my long arm and custom quilting business. And I also babysit my 6-month-old granddaughter 4 days a week.
Oh, my. What a resume. Wow. You sure keep busy.
Yes, I have.
So you lived in Ohio and Kentucky. Where are you now?
We are in Oklahoma now. And my family moved from Kentucky to Oklahoma in 2000 for a job opportunity. And then Steve and I met while I worked for American Diabetes Association. He was the chair for the cycling event, and I managed the walk event. We met in 2010, but we didn't have a lot of contact. I would see him at board meetings or events, but there was no reason for us to talk or have meetings together and such. When we did start talking, we dated for a year and married in 2013. And we lived in Jenks, which is a suburb of Tulsa, and my kids were still in school. And then in late May of 2021, Steve found this house, our property now, on a Facebook ad. And at the time, we were nearing retirement, and I couldn't understand why he was interested in a house that was so big and so far from where we lived. And it's an odd floor plan. That he explained that it would make such a fabulous retreat center with us living on one side of the house and having the other side of the property for quilt and craft and scrapbook retreats. And it made total sense. So we made an appointment. We looked at the house, and I was ready to move in that day. I just wanted to go home and pack. But the timing wasn't right, and I was heartbroken. But I knew in the back of my gut that this property was ours, but we couldn't move on it at the time. And we ended up coming back the following February, and we negotiated a price. We sold our house the weekend that we listed it, and we moved in April. And our official opening date for the retreat was June 1st of 2022.
So your anniversary was yesterday.
Yes. 2 years. We're having an open house on June 4th to recognize that event.
Oh, wonderful. Melissa, is there anything else about your family you wanted to share?
My only brother passed away in 2019, and my mom passed away last May after a very long and difficult battle with dementia. And over the past few years, my aunts and uncles have steadily been passing away. My family's very small as it is, and I'm down to one living uncle. And even though I don't feel old, I'm definitely becoming one of the oldest members of my family.
That's a hard time in life.
It's a little sobering because, I'm sure you feel the same way. I feel like I'm 25 and have a motor that won't end, but I'm turning into an old lady.
It is hard to accept. I told my daughter that I don't know how they are in their 40s when I am only 20.
Exactly.
Now, if you had the opportunity to talk to your great-great-great-grandchildren, how would you describe yourself to them?
I would want my great-great-grandchildren to know that all these old handmade quilts that their parents and their grandparents have should not go to Goodwill and should not be sold at a garage sale for a quarter. That each and every one of those quilts was literally made with love by their great-great-grandmother. And I would want my great-great-grandchildren to know that if they have creative talents, it likely came from my great-grandmother and has been passed down through multiple generations. I have a daughter that is an artist, a son that enjoys restoring furniture, and a daughter that loves to quilt and create. And I would want them to know about the business Steve and I created and how we found our unique niche and have made our facility stand out as Oklahoma's premier destination retreat center. And I would want them to know that no matter where life takes them, following their passions and building connections with others leads to a very fulfilling life.
In the first part of your answer, it was reminding me of you being under your grandmother's quilts. And with that experience, I see that you want your great-great-grandchildren to be able to see what your quilts were like too.
Exactly. It's an important legacy to me.
Mm-hmm. What would you want to say to your great-great-grandchildren?
To be true to yourself and to pursue the passions that you have in your heart and to live your life the best and the fullest that you can.
That's great. I know those two questions are a little hard to dig down and get, so thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Also, besides quilting, are there other crafts you do or have done in the past?
I enjoy embroidery. I make my kids a set of Aunt Martha's flour sack towels each year for Christmas. And I love making the Busilla felt stockings, but those take a lot of time for me to complete one. And I do enjoy kind of cross stitch, but again, that's another project that takes me a long time to complete. I want to start sewing toys and clothes for my grandbabies. I have two grandchildren that are 11 days apart. I have a little boy and I have a little girl.
Being 11 days apart, it's hard to be in two places at once, isn't it?
It is. And that's the wonderful thing about FaceTime is, I get to see my grandbabies every day. I don't get to hold them every day, but I get to see them every day because they have wonderful mamas that call me.
How sweet. Oh, Melissa, are there other hobbies that you do?
I don't really have a lot of time for other hobbies outside of the retreat center and my long arm and custom quilting business, my personal quilting and babysitting for my 6-month-old granddaughter. I do love to cook and I like to cook big and I like to meal prep and have things available in the freezer. Raising 6 kids, I always cooked big and it's hard not to do that now. I feel like if I have the pan out and I'm making bacon, I may as well cook up 3 pounds of bacon instead of 3 slices. So cooking could be a hobby for me and baking.
I'm going to jump back just a minute. Now, with 6 kids, what was the age range from the oldest to the youngest?
There was 10 years between my kids, approximately 18 months to 2 years. I had 6 children, so I had 4 girls, a boy, and a girl. And so my oldest is 35 and my youngest will be 25 in December.
It's so nice for them to have siblings that close. I love that.
Yes. Again, my brother was 11 and a half years older than me, and I was bound and determined that my kids would not be lonely.
Yeah, your parents had 2 single children.
Exactly.
Do you think your hobbies or your other crafts show up in your quilting?
Although I don't really have a lot of additional hobbies, I tend to do things in a chain piecing sequence. I find that things get done bigger and quicker when working on a large scale. I like to cook big. I like to organize. And for me, method and routine is crucial.
And I bet that's important running your retreat center too.
Absolutely.
Who introduced you to quilting?
That would probably be my Aunt Edith, which was my dad's oldest sister. Many, many years ago, Edith gave me a box of fabric and she told me that there was a quilt top started in there and that my great-grandmother had started it. My great-grandmother passed away at 111 when I was about 5. And she was 6 years old when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So that just kind of gives you the time frame of how close you are to history for me. So I always thought that was kind of interesting and amazing, actually. But my great-grandmother started the quilt top, and then her daughter, which was my Granny Muncie, worked on it. And then my Aunt Edith worked on the quilt top, but it was never completed. And my Aunt Edith was just a little short, intense fireball. And I remember her giving me this box of fabric in the 90s, and she stared at me intently and told me the history of these little patchwork quilts. And she ended it by saying, and Melissa, if you work on it, that will be the 4th generation who has worked on this quilt and made this quilt. And that was probably 35 years ago. And I had no desire or no knowledge on quilting. that I valued the importance and the significance of what she gave me and that story that she shared with me. So I toted that box around through a couple different states and kept it in the back of a closet for years. And about 10 years ago, I decided that I wanted to start quilting, and I dug that tub out of my great-grandmother's fabric, and I had some vintage fabric that looked to be the same period. It wasn't big enough to make an entire quilt, the pieces that she had given, but I added vintage fabric to it that I thrifted, and I was able to make a full-size quilt. And I had found a pair of like little blue gingham curtains in the box, and I used that for the binding. And it's just, to me, just precious knowing that this quilt has been through so many hands in my family.
What a privilege to get to finish that up.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Because you know that each one of these ladies began this project saying, I'm going to knock this out this week. And for whatever reason, it got put away and never finished.
Now, have your daughters let you know that they're sad that they don't get to be the next one to work on it?
None of my girls were interested in quilting 10 years ago when I finished this. So I do have one daughter that loves to sew, loves to quilt. She's very handy and creative. And when she has downtime, which isn't a lot, she works full time. She has a baby. She's going to nursing school. So she has to be very intentional in her time that she makes for the crafts that she enjoys. But she could have cared less about it when I did this quilt.
Do you have a favorite quilt?
I would say it would be this quilt because of the history. You know, it's a very simple, it's a little 4-patch, so it's not anything fancy, but just knowing the history of it, that my aunt, my grandmother, my great-grandmother worked on it. And I appreciate that she chose me to get that box of fabric. There are other nieces, there's her grandchildren, her granddaughters, that maybe she saw some creativity in me. I know that she sewed and crafted with her granddaughters, but I feel very special that she gave me a part of my grandmother's craftiness or creativity.
Yeah. That is so precious that she chose you to do that, especially because when you first mentioned it, I was thinking you were a quilter already, but you weren't at the time.
I was a kid, yeah. I mean, it's a miracle that I kept it. Again, I like that history. I like that legacy. I dearly loved my Granny Muncie. My Aunt Edith was the most precious woman you'd ever met. I remember visiting my great-grandmother and just being in awe that she was so stinking old. So all these different women in my life that I had their DNA inside of me worked on this quilt. It's just an incredible gift and a treasure.
Mm-hmm. In thinking they worked on it without all the wonderful tools we have.
Exactly. And I actually made this quilt. It's not a featherweight, but I have one of those old black finger sewing machines, and those things run like a top. They do the prettiest stitch in the world. And I completed that quilt on a little 1938 era sewing machine that's very similar to what my Aunt Edith and grandmother used. I'm sure my great-grandmother probably had a treadle, but I was very in the moment when I finished that quilt.
Yeah. So is there a tool that you are so happy you have that they may not have had?
Oh, definitely my AccuQuilt. I have the Go Big. I love the precision and speed that I can cut pieces and strips. I can cut out an entire quilt in such a short amount of time. And I have a number of the dies for AccuQuilt that the strip cutters are my favorite. It's just such a quick, precise process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those AccuQuilts can really speed things up for us.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Have you had yours long?
I've had it probably 3 years, at least 3 years.
With all the steps in our quilting process, do you have a step you look forward to?
It would be cutting. Even with a rotary cutter, I like having the whole quilt cut so I can chain piece. Cutting is my favorite.
So you cut out all your pieces and then start sewing.
Yes. I like having it all cut out so I know if there's any snafus with fabric, if I need to go ahead and get something ordered or purchased, that I can do that. I don't want to start a quilt and be half a yard short that I can never get this fabric again. I feel like I've wasted my time. So for me, the cutting part is the first step of my organizing. And a little piece of advice to go with that is if you cut out a quilt knowing that this is going to be a someday project, I'm not going to work on it today, but someday, make sure you include the pattern with it, because I stumbled across a shoebox full of pieces cut and I have no idea what the pattern is.
Oh, that's a great tip. And we're not even to your tip yet.
Yeah, I have more tips.
Share your worst quilting experience.
Well, my worst quilting experience is identified with my favorite quilting process. I had a rotary cutter incident and cut my finger pretty bad. I was cutting too much at once and I was in a hurry. I used to get up a couple hours early so I could sew before I went to work. And I was almost done cutting my project. And I was rushing so I could get it finished, so I could get dressed and leave for work. And I was at home alone, and it's pretty traumatizing. I haven't experienced a lot of injuries, so it was pretty dramatic. I called my husband, and I wanted him to come home and get me because I'm pretty sure I'm going to die from this little tiny cut on my finger, But he told me if you would just drive to the hospital, it would be quicker in the long run. So I had issues getting my pajamas off and dressed without letting go of my finger. I think I had 10 stitches. So, it was bad, but I've seen much worse. But it was pretty terrific for me. And I've never broken any bones. So this was my first visit to the emergency for myself. But sometimes I'm a little cringy when I cut because, I don't know about you, but I put my shoulder, I put my elbow in it. I'm cutting like I'm running a race, and it's a vision that I could have cut my finger clean off. So I've slowed down and I'm a little more careful.
Oh, wow. Well, ouch to begin with. But I'm afraid too many people will relate to that story, but I can't imagine what pain that would be in having to get yourself to the hospital. Not a good thing.
Oh, I know. And I cried like a big baby the whole way there because I felt so sorry for myself. But it was scary. I cut it deep. I cut it big. We buy the sharpest rotary blades that we can. We tell ourselves to change them frequently so they stay sharp. And you hit your finger at 15 miles an hour, you're going to cut it.
Did it affect your finger in any way? Like, do you have numb feeling or is it all fine now?
It is all fine now, thank goodness. I know a lady right now that has cut her finger really, really bad, and it's serious, and she's going to the doctor to determine what her next step is going to be, and that's just sickening.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen those gloves that they make. They have that handle you can put on your cutting ruler that is like the shower wall suction cup things. There are things in place that you can do to keep yourself safe, but I think we all think that would never happen to me.
Oh. Yeah, I have not cut my finger, but I did touch my arm on my iron and looked over and the skin was just melting. It was like it was a candle. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Oh, wait, this is going to hurt.
Your brain hadn't found out quite just yet that you burnt your arm. Boy, I bet that hurt for a week.
It did hurt for a while. I am so thankful for aloe.
I did have a friend that her rotary blade fell off the table and landed straight down on the top of her foot, on the bony part of her foot. And it was very slow to heal. You've heard from people to always close your rotary blade or put it down into safety, even just between cuts. There's a reason that they tell you that, and I now do that, especially like with the Creative Grids one, the real heavy one. If you kind of touch your open rotary blade cutter. That one doesn't move. It's so heavy that it'll stay there. And I have nicked my hands multiple times because versus my little lightweight one that if you nudge it, it just slides away. Those heavier ones, they don't slide away.
Mm.
So close your rotary cutter.
Why do you continue to make quilts when you could spend your time doing anything else?
I like the therapy that sewing affords me. I like to be creative. I like to work with my hands. I love the fact that I may have inherited the creativity I have from my ancestors who didn't teach me that it was possibly just birthed in me or passed through. And sometimes I like to just sew. I love to make little patchwork quilts. I like to sew for the sake of sewing. You know, I have some people that will make a Judy Niemeyer quilt and it'll take them forever. And it's such a stunning, beautiful, one-of-a-kind project. But sometimes I just want to sew. I just want a chain piece and just sew, and not think about it. So for me, it's therapeutic.
There is something about sitting at the sewing machine and sewing. And who do you make your quilts for?
I make each of my kids a quilt for Christmas. And now that I have 2 grandbabies, I get to make them lots of quilts. Through my quilting and long arm business, I do a lot of custom quilts, mainly memory quilts and t-shirt quilts. They can be challenging to create because of the materials used, but I know they're an absolute gift and a treasure, and I'm honored to be part of that process.
And it's so appreciated by the people that hire you to do that.
Yes, I just did a Harley Davidson quilt, and a lady picked it up this week, and it's Harley Davidson t-shirts from her husband and his father, and they wrote together. So he was just thrilled beyond measure to have this quilt completed.
How exciting to be part of that.
Yeah, totally.
So what are you working on right now?
I have several projects in the works. One of them is actually a collaboration with Jody. I wanted to design a quilt block and a pattern for the retreat center. And I sketched out what I wanted it to be, and she drew it up with her software. And I finished one version of the quilt, and I need to piece together a second version. And then she is working on creating the wording or the instructions for the pattern. So that's kind of exciting. And then I always have scrappy quilts going and several that I need to long arm. My long arm pile personally is getting bigger and bigger. And I just joined my first ever quilt along. It's called Father Christmas by Pixel Quilt. Dee is here in the Tulsa area, and she created this pattern for Legit Kids, which is in Oklahoma City. So Dee makes pixelated quilts. So if you want to look her up, it's Dee Bushrotter. She's from Britain, so she has that beautiful dialect. But she made a quilt that was sent to the Queen, and she just did an Amy Winehouse quilt that was in honor of the movie that came out for Amy Winehouse. And she's going to a quilt show in Britain, and if I remember right, she's going to try to find her family and present the quilt to them. She's done like a Post Malone quilt, and she took it to the concert. She makes these quilts of famous people and then tries to get them to them. And she's incredibly talented, and she's working on a software program to make pixelated quilts. So you can take a picture of your mother and scan it in there, and it's usually just the face. And so this Father Christmas quilt, I think, is probably going to be one of her simpler pixel quilts, but it's something that a newbie can start. And so Legit Kids has these amazing foundation paper piece quilts where it might be a mermaid, or it might be an octopus, or it might be Michelangelo, even down to the private parts, but they're phenomenal. So look them up, and they're in Oklahoma City, and they're a relatively new business, but you buy the kit from them.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's all solid color fabric. So The mermaid is predominantly blues and teals and the flesh color. And I think she has red hair, and they're fascinating quilts.
I'm curious, how big are the pixel pieces?
Leslie of Inappropriate Quilters is pattern testing for Dee on the software, and she had scanned in, I guess, a picture of her grandmother. And if you go to Leslie Quilt's page, you can see the progress, because I think within the last day or two, she posted a picture. She's down to her grandma's mouth. I think some of the squares are an inch. I don't know if all the squares are an inch, because obviously your forehead might just be one big piece, but the shadows around your eyes and nose are comprised of little bitty pieces. But I've heard her mention more than once 1 inch squares.
Okay.
You're not going to finish that quilt in a weekend.
No. I was just thinking more of all the seams on the back and how tight that would be.
Right. And I'm sure that's part of the instruction process of which way to iron it. And I don't know if you listen to Inappropriate Quilters, but they had Verushka from Pride and Joy Quilting on there, and she talked at length about thread, and I believe it's 70 weight thread. I just buy thread, I just buy thread. And I know like my long arm needs 40 weight, but other than that, I just buy thread. Well, Verushka does similar to the quilts that Legit Kids does, and she's very specific and intentional about her thread, because the thinness makes a flatter seam. It was really interesting for me to listen to, because I could use twine and not realize that it was messing up my quilt.
Oh, we're always learning something.
Right.
That's neat. Well, do you have another tip to share with us?
I have a couple tips. My favorite would probably be to get a 1/4 inch foot and know how to use it. Know how to line your fabric up and use that 1/4 inch foot. Precision is so important. And starching, to really truly starch, like my friend Rochelle Rice starches. She does like 40-60 or 50-50 of the Stay Flow liquid starch to water. I do half and half. It's just easier for my math challenge brain to do half and half. I saturate my fabric and I run it through a wringer and then air dry it before pressing it. And it makes the fabric so much easier to work with. It's not floppy, it's stiff, it holds its shape, it irons nice. So starching is very big for me.
I was curious on that. So before you starch it, do you run it through the wash to wash out what in there already and then starch it, or do you just starch it off the bolt?
I starch it off the bolt. I do not wash it. Some people will wash their fabric to pre-shrink it. Starching, just by the process, will pre-shrink it. I would not recommend that you starch your charm packs, your layer cakes, your other pieces, because if you're following a pattern that wants a true 5-inch square and you starch your charm packs, they're not going to be 5 inches anymore. And one of the nice things too about starching is, say you're just taking your fabric off the bolt and you give it a nice little iron, and then you start cutting out the pieces, and then you press it and you press it and you press it again, and you've pressed it 5 or 6 times because you're adding pieces to your quilt block. The heat is going to affect the size a little bit, but once you starch it and it's essentially pre-shrunk, it is not going to change. So you can press, and it's going to maintain that size integrity.
That's so interesting. And please tell me it doesn't take too much longer.
Well, and that's the thing with that old-fashioned wringer. When you dip it down in there in the starch solution and you run it through the wringer, it's kind of like our ancestors washing their clothes. They've wrung out most of the liquid that's in our clothes, and then I lay it on a little drying rack, and if it's nice outside, I mean, it can be dry in 15, 20 minutes. And then also, if I'm doing a project, I will do the lightest piece first. So I'm not going to dip my red fabric or my black fabric into starch and then follow up with the white fabric. So I'll do my white, my yellow, my blue, my dark green, my black in order to where if there's any color transfer, it's not affecting my pale colors.
So with starching, since you talked about the color transfer, once the quilt is finished and you wash it, do you have less color transfer?
I have not had issue with color transfer. So fingers crossed on that. I'm always, even with modern fabric that I've bought today, red makes me a nervous wreck. I've had fabric that is vintage that I don't know how our ancestors created quilts without ruining everything they made.
Can you describe to us how you went from having quilting as a hobby and now you decided to have a business?
Well, I'll speak separately about my two businesses. There's the retreat center and then my quilting and long arming business. I think naturally as people quilt and they post pictures on their social media and they gift things to family and friends, people start asking, would you do something like that for me? So that was a big part of doing my long arming and quilting business, especially with memory quilts and t-shirt quilts and high school graduation quilts, is somebody always knows somebody that would like to have something made. So that to me was kind of a natural progression. And then when I don't want to say that I retired because I'm in my 50s, but when I resigned from my nonprofit job this spring, my intention has been to focus on my quilting and long arming and retreat business on a full-time basis. And then as far as the retreat center goes, Steve has always wanted to have an income revenue in our retirement years, and he didn't know what that would look like. He's always been intrigued by home-based businesses, but again, he wasn't really sure what that picture would be. So he was open to ideas and possibilities of a realistic income. I grew up hustling. My mom would always call me a little entrepreneur, and I've had several home-based businesses. I've had small businesses. So I knew the concept of how to run a business, what would work, ways to market. With the magazine that I published 25 years ago, marketing isn't quite the same then as it is now. So I've had to look at more social media forms of advertising versus print advertising. I still think print advertising is valuable, but it's different than what it was 25 years ago. So luckily for me and the group of people that I run in and the market, if you will, doing the quilting in the retreat center has been very productive. And I think too, you're naturally going to do better at what you're passionate about.
Yes. People can see that when you're passionate about it, and also just that word of mouth, because when you're passionate and people come and see what you're about, and then they're passionate about what you're doing too.
I agree. People can be in business just purely to be in business and make money, and they can be very successful at it. And then sometimes you'll run into people that say, I've always wanted to own a retreat center, but they don't have good marketing skills or knowledge on how to do the day-to-day operations. They may want to just focus on the fact that I'm a business owner and I've decorated this place so cute and everyone is going to run to me. But there may be major things that they've lost in the details. So it's a whole package, in my opinion. For me, you have to go into it without rose-colored glasses. Just because it's something fun and you've always dreamed of doing. I think it would be fun, and I've always dreamed of being a brain surgeon, but there has to be some knowledge behind that to do it successfully.
So we can't do like the commercial of I stayed in a Holiday Inn last night so I can do anything I wanted?
Probably not 100% accurate.
Well, share the name of your business and how you came up with the name.
We named our retreat center Osage Hills Retreat. Our property sits on 11 acres and it is just picturesque. We own the hillside to the west of our driveway, and it's covered in limestone rock formations, and it's quite beautiful. We are located in historic Osage County, Oklahoma. This is an area that is rich in history. If you're familiar with the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, that took place in our county seat, which is Pawhuska, which is just 37 miles away. So I wanted a business name that reflected the beauty of our property and to honor the history of our community.
So are you running Osage Hills Retreat Center under your long arm business, or did you actually make two separate companies?
It is two separate companies. I call them sister companies. The long arm custom quilt business is Osage Hills Quilting. So I wanted there to be a partnership and a sisterhood between the two of them. The logos and the website have a complementary feel to one another, but I consider them two separate businesses.
And when did the retreat center actually get to open?
Right at 2 years ago. We opened on June 1st, 2022.
So you're having your open house this week. What special things are going on this week?
So we are referring to this as our open house and business after hours. We are collaborating with the Skiatook Chamber of Commerce to create this event and host this event. We want to open our doors to the community and to the local business members to see our facility. Obviously, as well, we want to open it to the quilting and crafting scrapbooking community. I know ladies like to come out and preview a property and see what they can expect before they come sometimes. We will have swag bags for the first 50 guests. We'll have appetizers, hors d'oeuvres, beer and wine. We'll do little tours and show people the facility and just let them experience the unique property and business that we have out here.
That's going to be such a fun and exciting time.
I love it. This will be our third open house, actually, when we first opened, and then at our 1 year point and at our 2 year point. And I plan on doing it each year as long as it's well received, because it's a great time to get to know people in your community, and friends will bring a friend and you make great contacts and connections.
And that's where your marketing is coming in, right?
A little bit, yeah. And who doesn't love a party?
Right. So how did you feel when a group that you didn't personally know reserved your retreat center?
You know, when a group I don't know personally reserves a retreat center, I just feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. It's an opportunity to introduce new people to the welcoming and creative environment that we've cultivated here. And I feel honored that they've chosen our center for their getaway. And I'm committed to ensure that they have a memorable experience. And with our individual retreaters retreats, it's gratifying to see strangers come together and leave as friends, united by their shared love of crafting. Many of our individual retreaters reschedule as a group, and knowing that we played a part in that friendship matchmaking is extremely rewarding.
It's fun to see quilters come together, not only to work on their projects, but to meet each other.
Right. We have two opportunities. Obviously, you can reserve the retreat center for your group of friends where it's just you ladies. Or if you don't have a group that you sew with, I have ladies that have moved here from other states, or none of their friends craft. So they're like, you know, if you have room in a group, I'd love to join. So we created the individual retreaters retreat, where everyone knows coming in that everyone is signing up individually. And you may have ladies who crochet or scrapbook or quilt, but you know, you're all tied together. You're doing something with your hands creatively and making something. So they come in knowing that they're going to meet new friends. And like I said, we've had quite a number. The majority of our groups will reschedule together.
That's so exciting. Now, I see that Rochelle and Leslie of Inappropriate Quilters, they've been to your retreat center. So how did you end up connecting with them?
I boldly reached out to them to tell them about our retreat center. Business-wise, they are about 10 months older than we are. And I had searched for a quilting podcast and listened to them, not realizing that they were here in Tulsa, again, Tulsa based. During that time, when I first found them and was listening to them, I met a woman at a quilt show, and she said I should give them a call. And I was shocked to know that they were essentially my neighbors. Rochelle actually lives in Osage County, but she's on the other side of the county. Osage County is the biggest county in Oklahoma. And I'm thrilled that the Inappropriate Quilters are coming back this summer. Rochelle also teaches workshops here for her collage and pet portrait classes, and she has 3 classes scheduled in September. And then we are also doing our second annual Camp Rochelle Winneso in October, and our first annual Galentine's in February of 2025. So actually, I'm auditioning to be Rochelle's BFF. She is one of the sweetest, most loving, funniest ladies I know, and I just absolutely adore being in her presence.
Mm-hmm. They are fun to listen to, aren't they?
Absolutely, they really are.
And I just assume that all carries over when they're there at your retreat center.
Yes, it does.
Melissa, is there anything else you wanted to share about your businesses?
We published a retreat cookbook earlier this year. We compiled over 200 recipes from over 60 retreaters from all over the U.S. and even Australia. The cookbook showcases retreat favorites. So I marketed the book as we all have that one dish that's a fan favorite. It's often requested. There's no leftovers. It's a unique dish. It's our signature dish. So when you go to retreat, you may already know in your mind, I'm definitely taking my such and such dish. So we had such a great response to the compilation of the cookbook and sales as well. We've almost sold out of our first run. So I'm debating on whether to do a reprint of this cookbook or do a volume 2. And I'm collaborating with Ladine Watson of Sugar Stitches Quilt Company to offer our first annual Creative Mastermind Summit. It's about a week and a half from now. It's happening June 11th and 12th. And we have a great lineup of creative women business owners who are attending. So we really are looking forward to this being a great event. And it's over 6 months in the making and planning. And last but by far not least, we are also hosting Rona the Riveter, the traveling quilter, towards the end of June. Rona is hosting her Stonehenge quilt retreat, and we are one of 3 locations this summer. And we were absolutely delighted when she reached out last year to get this scheduled. She and Lisa of Serendipitous have a great monthly live show called Quilt Babble. And Serendipitous just won an award. I believe they were voted like the best locally owned quilt shop in the United States. So if you don't listen to that show, give it a listen.
There's so much work that goes into you putting on these retreats that people never see, all that work and collaborations that go together to bring this about. That is amazing.
It's a lot of work, and sometimes it's a year and a half out that you really can't talk about anything until much closer to the event, but it's just thrilling and exciting. And I love even just in the background of getting the retreat center prep to dealing with hosts that are very active and want to do special things for their group of ladies. There's a lot of background work that's fun.
So how many people can you have at the retreat center at once?
We host up to 9 ladies at one time. We have 2 bedrooms. They're very large bedrooms. One has 4 twin beds. One has 5 twin beds. They both have full bathrooms. The activity center is very big and roomy, lots of natural light, and we added a lot of additional ceiling light, and it's set up for 9. And we have beyond ample parking. It's a great setup.
And where can we find your business?
Our website is osagehillsretreat.com, and Osage is spelled Osage. I'm pretty active on Instagram and Facebook, and both of those are Osage Hills Retreat. And then my quilting and long arming business is Osage Hills Quilting. And I'm also active on Instagram and Facebook with this as well.
Great. And those links will also be on your episode page on aquilterslife.com.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Melissa, for sharing with us on A Quilter's Life. I so enjoyed hearing your story.
It was so good talking to you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.